Hey friends, welcome to our professional development today for how can I make computer-based assessments more effective for my students. So let's get started. I want you to grab your device, your cell phone or your iPad, and scan this quick QR and share with me real quick what some of your feelings are based on computer-based assessment. I know that we all come into this PD already having some preconceived notions based on our own personal experiences or things that we've heard in the past about computer-based assessment. And I just want to hear from each of you real quick. I'm going to pause the presentation and we'll look at the Padlet that this is going to and talk about those just for a moment. So go ahead and do that now. Okay, so that was some interesting things that you all had to share, and I'm glad to see that all of you feel comfortable and safe to share out with me some of your feelings. And I hope that I'm able to help each of you feel more confident in computer-based assessment by the end of this PD today. So you're going to need for this class your laptop and something to take notes with, pen or pencil, or if you like taking them on your laptop, you go right ahead, wherever you prefer to take notes. Okay, so the question is computer-based assessment effective as paper-based assessment? And I know some of you are shaking your heads no right now, maybe out loud or privately in your mind. That's okay. You go ahead and do that. Everybody's entitled to their own opinions, but I have studied some research at length and that has been conducted over the last several years. And I'm happy to tell you that the answer is yes, it can be as effective as paper-based assessments. It all depends on some external variables for students, and you maybe have already thought of some of these. So let's start by looking at the strengths of computer-based assessment. I know some of you have already thought about these, such as instant scoring and instant feedback to not only the students, but also yourself. It's a really good thing for teachers to be digitally literate and assessment literate, if you will, because that means that you know how to pick up an assessment, pick up some feedback that you receive from an assessment and make a decision on some prescriptions for what to do next with your students. So while it's very good for students to get that feedback, it's equally as good for you as their teacher to get that feedback right away so that you can make those prescriptions for them on an efficient basis and on a regular basis. And if you have something that's doing instamatic scoring for you, that kind of frees up some of your time so that you can pick up that data and then begin to look at it. Also, it allows for collaboration amongst other students. If you see that there's a group of students that all missed a similar question, you might pull them to small group, allow them to collaborate with each other, and collaborate with you about what went wrong on that question. It also, I love this part. This is something that I've added in here. And let me say real quick, because I didn't say this before, I don't think, but I've compiled this list based on research that I've read, based on a field study that I sent out to that some of you maybe even answered in and included in, and based on my own personal experiences. So this is based on several different venues that I gathered these strengths and the weaknesses that we're going to look at next. So another one is it doesn't allow for completion with blanks. If we're looking at fast testing, it does make sure that they've answered all their questions or doesn't let them finish up the test. If you're doing a reading wonders test, it does give them a spot at the end before they hit submit where they have to look and see, is there anything I didn't complete? And I have to pause and say right now, I know that's a huge thing because in the old days, if they didn't answer something, there was no computer to catch it on FSA and FCAT testing. It was just marked wrong. We had to implant that in our students all the time. That's a change for computer-based assessment. Another one, I know with all the Reading Wonders assessments that I've given, and I'm talking to you from Florida, you may be listening to this from another state or even country. But if you're listening to this, and you're in Florida, then we give Florida Wonders assessments, and those assessments, even if we give the computer based ones, they also will flag them at the end if they're not complete, and so that does help a student to do that. In my experiences with paper based assessment over the last several years on Reading Wonders, it does not matter how many strategies, how much reminding, how many warning before they got started, giving a nod to the children, like before they turn their tests in. Are you sure you went back and checked? You made sure you answered every answer? And I'd always get, yeah, yeah. But nevertheless, every single test that I ever gave out in all the years I gave them, there was always someone that didn't answer one of the questions, be it with a pick two or pick three, and they only pick one. Or they marked it with strategies that I've given them to make sure they pick two or three, and then they still forget to mark it, or they'll miss a whole page. So that's definitely a strength of computer-based assessment. It helps to eliminate that. Also, it allows students to be able to enlarge their print and activate accommodations, allowing them to be able to control their screen settings. So if children are able to do that, we're going to go into this further later in the PD, that gives them some affordance of comfort areas for them. And I know some of you are like, oh, they play with that. Well, we're going to talk about some ways to conquer that as well. Also, portability for testing environments. We all learned this when we went to, online schooling for a year in the past during pandemic. And we all learned that children need to be able to do a test from elsewhere occasionally. It's not the, preference. It's not the norm. Sometimes we have online students. And sometimes it's maybe they need to make up a test, like a student, and it's not a good scenario for them to retake it in class once they've returned from an absence. So the portability of computer-based assessment is also good. That's kind of similar with paper-based, but again, it still will stem right back to the teacher and that kind of thing. Also, it gives an opportunity for more legibility in the writing process. So we have seen, and I have seen in my experiences, that when my students are able to type out their writing answers, that it does help me be able to read what they wrote. It's much more legible. And I know that some of you are like, oh, they don't have the keyboarding skills. We're going to talk about that again as well later in the PD. But if they have those good keyboarding skills and they're able to type okay, and it definitely allows for legibility. And that is something that we're seeing more as technology becomes more and more, a prominent thing in society today. So let's now move forward and look at some of those weaknesses that I know all of you are thinking, and some of you have shared with me in the field study, as well as some of you have shared today already on our Padlet. So yes, there is a struggle with testing tools. We do see children doing that, as well as teachers question if students are using the testing strategies that they've taught them less on computer than they do on paper. Also choose Christmas. I call it Christmas treeing, but it's basically random answering for completion. That means just picking whatever answer bubble they want and moving on. They do that with paper too, though. If the child's going to do it, they tend to do that. And that's something that we as teachers have to monitor for. But that is something that we do see sometimes on computer-based as well as paper-based. Anyway, also glitches from the internet or technology during the assessment. This is oftentimes one of the big complaints. I will say, in my experiences of giving online based or computer based assessment, it's not a constant or common thing. It's rare, but I think there's some ways that we can prepare our children also to conquer that as well. Poor keyboarding skills, or students lacking familiarity, with the formats of the assessment. That's definitely going to be something that will cause them to struggle and not be able to produce as quickly. or, as effectively. So we're going to talk about that later today too. Also, the temptation to click on to other websites. That is something that we want to make sure that we talk about as well. That's definitely a weakness that I've seen as well in computer-based assessment. Unequal practice and exposure to technology can limit ability to demonstrate proficiency of skills. That's another one that has come up in my research and from some of you. And higher distractions on computer-based assessment. All right, so now that we've laid on the table all of the issues that I know some of you have felt accompany computer-based assessment, as well as maybe some things I've seen in my past, and some things that I've seen that were negatives that were presented in research that I've read. Let's look at some ways that we can conquer those things and make computer-based assessment as effective, because studies have shown that it is as equally as effective as paper-based. All right, let's move forward. So now you might be thinking to yourself, well, what can I do? That's too many weaknesses. Let's just go back to paper pencil. That's not where we're at anymore, friends. In our ever-changing world of technology, the reality is our students are surrounded by technology every day. As time is progressing, you all know that continues to be more and more a part of everyday life, and our students come in almost knowing more than some of us do about how to handle technology. So this is a common thing for them, whereas for some of us it's making us having to really stretch our comfort zones, because we haven't been brought up with that to the degree that they have. But that doesn't mean that they're not ready for it, and it doesn't mean that we can't learn it and that we can't help to prepare them so that it can be as effective as studies have shown it can be. So it's also our job to make sure that they're able to tackle academic challenges and be college and career ready. And this is one of those things that we need to do for them. We can do this. So let's dive into this a little bit more. So I keep telling you, I've read this research. So let me show you some of the things that I have found in research. Daniel Kelly, in his article, Overcoming Barriers to Classroom Technology Integration, shares that teacher bias, prior experience, and vicarious experiences are significant factors in the success or failure of classroom technology integration. Notice that first part there, teacher bias and prior experience is a big part of failure for classroom and technology integration. That is telling us right there, friends, that there are things that maybe we bring in from notions that we've had, bad experiences we've had as technology was getting off the ground and didn't have all its kinks worked out. It still doesn't, but neither do we, right? And so that's one I want us to talk about today. We're going to be looking at how to help with maybe shifting some of that bias, shifting you to some good experiences so that you feel more confident and happy with this. Also, Benjamin Harold, in his article, Navigation of Computer-Based Tests, Matters for Young Students, studies find. He did do an analysis of some studies, one from an author, Levins, in 2011. He did some research into some of the things he had to say. And he found that there's a mounting body of evidence that some students tend to do worse on computer-based versions of an exam for reasons that have more to do with their familiarity with technology than with their academic knowledge of skills. So it's not the point that they aren't academically able, it's that they're not familiar with the technology enough to be able to produce effectively what they know. So that's another thing we want to really talk about today as we're discussing some of these factors. And then Sheila Baker, in her article, The Writing Performance of Elementary Students Using Digital Writing Apps, and this is important for us to look at as well, because, as we are becoming more and more apt to have technology, there is digital writing as well, and there's writing assessments that are now on the computer, even here in Definitely here in Florida, that's now our new thing. They have to type their writing assessments that they take throughout the year. Anyway, Sheila Baker studied 30 peer-reviewed empirical studies that had been conducted from 2002 to 2017 on teacher challenges for technology, and this was her findings. The reported barriers were found across the literature, and they included teacher beliefs about technology was one of the barriers. Also, the need for relevant professional development, and that's what we're working on today, and access to technology for instructional purposes. So these are things that we want to look at because these are actually things that we can overcome, friends. These are things that if we as teachers are prepared, if we make ourselves more literate with our technology, then we can make sure that our students are literate in that area as well. So let's talk about that elephant in the room of internet computer glitches. So you're right on that. Along with technology inevitably comes error. After all, computers are not humans. But we can train students to know what to do in the case of a glitch during regular testing. We can talk about not playing with those testing tools for one. If children are adequately trained to use testing tools and they're familiar with what they're going to be, and they've been using them on a regular basis throughout the entire year, starting from week 1 of entering school, they're not going to want to play with those testing tools because they're just going to be old hat, boring like a pencil, and they're not going to see that as a new thing to play and try out because they've already tried it out 1,000 times before in their regular classroom testing before they get to progress monitoring computer-based assessment. So there's some things we're going to talk about with that. And then that way they won't be constantly changing settings, because I've seen that too. And yes, it is something that can hold them back if they're not prepared and we haven't had those conversations with them. We also need to set expectations about what we expect of them when they're thinking through an assessment. Often when a computer sits idle during computer-based assessment for too long, that can cause errors to happen. I know I've had that happen with students that I was administering assessments to in the past. So we have to make sure that they know they've got to make sure their screen stays alive. They need to make sure by, tapping the space bar or something every once in a while. And they need to do things like if they get stuck on a question, we need to teach them, and this goes along with pacing that we're going to address in a little while. We got to talk to them, have those conversations about making a choice and flag the page, come back to it later after our minds have had some time to rest so we're not sitting there too long. I want you to kind of think about it like this when it comes to internet and computer glitches with computer-based assessment. We all have one of these. We all have a cell phone. I don't know anybody now, down to, even young children are starting to have them more and more, that doesn't have a cell phone in their possession most of the time. So, and they get errors. They need updates, they freeze, they have problems that happen, right? But we don't chuck them out and stop using them because of an error, because it glitches. We would feel like we were lost. We would feel like, I've lost all my communication and my connections. If we put that much value into our cell phone, we can put that much value into a computer-based assessment and work through it and figure out the kinks to make it better so that it can benefit us in the long run with things like that instant online scoring and sending the grades immediately to data and to spreadsheets and to, our grading books and such like that. So errors are not in the majority. Just like you don't get an error on your cell phone every day, we don't get errors in computer-based assessment every single day or all the time or every child. But it does happen. And when you have thousands of children taking, like, say, the progress monitoring fast assessment, that's inevitable. Somebody's going to have a glitch, but it's not everybody. But haven't we all had problems with paper-based assessment before as well? We have. So we have to put that in perspective. I think that sometimes because our comfort zone was a paper-based assessment, that it makes us feel like, Oh, it's all because it's the CBA. When in fact, it's something we have to teach our students how to do, just like we taught them how to do paper based assessment. Um, being a literacy coach, I'm in classrooms of all age groups from kindergarten through fifth grade all the time. And it's painful when a kindergarten and first grade teacher is working with little students at 5 and 6 years old how to take a paper based assessment. It's the same with computer based. So, like, if we teach them at the same time we're teaching them paper pencil testing, how to do computer based testing, they're going to grow up being able to do that, and it won't be as painful anymore if we make that a systemic thing. So this is something we need to implement campus wide, in our local campuses and our across districts, because this is what's going to help them. It's not enough to hold us back from growth, those errors that we see sometimes, or the benefits that we might see it bring. So now you're saying, all right, well, how do I do that? Let's start with keyboarding. So students need as much practice with keyboarding as they do with handwriting. This can be picked up more and more as they do online assignments in class, through computer labs, through homework assignments, and center time. We don't want students to be searching for a key and lose focus on what they need to do. And some of you, that may have been your kind of your negative con, that you thought that made computer based assessment not as good. But here's the thing: if they learn to keyboard alongside print, which both are equally as valuable in today's world, they need to know how to print, and they also and handwrite. They need that hand-eye coordination. They also need to learn to keyboard, because that is our world now. That's our technology world, here in America and all over the world. So we need to make sure that our students are prepared for that. And so we can be implementing some keyboarding training with regular little assignments that they do. I promise you, they're already doing it some at home as well. I have littles in my life, nieces and nephews and godchildren. They're all already doing it at home. And it's very rare now that we even hear that a child does not have some kind of technology or device in their home, especially in the county I come from. I know that we've gone 1-to-1 iPads for all students. So there should be equal exposure now for technology, which is something we didn't have several years ago, even when some of the research was being first conducted. So some of those variables that we once had that was causing people to have that initial thinking, that print based was more effective because they were seeing some differences in the computer based scoring because of the lack of familiarity, that's beginning to fade away. Because now students do have 1-to-1 technology, students are becoming more and more familiar with these formats, platforms, and devices. So we need to embrace this and be able to join in with them and be able to lead them. That means you, as their teacher, sitting down with technology the day before, night before, week before, making sure that before you present something to them, that you know it and you understand it, that you've done your legwork for training yourself so that you can answer their questions. I'm not saying that you're going to be 100% knowing every single little thing there is to know. But if you are constantly pushing yourself to develop and have that growth mindset to grow yourself in technology for education and academic purposes, then you're going to be able to guide your students through that seamlessly. And that's what we want to see happen. And the issues will begin to decline. The issues will begin to fade away as our children are systemically learning all these things. So they can learn keyboarding in online assignments in class, their computer lab, homework, and center times. We don't want students to be searching for a key and lose that focus. So that's one of our most important things, and the first thing right off. Okay, another way how you do that: testing tools. There are testing tools all over. Reading Wonders assessments online if you're in Florida again, and I'm sure that it's similar in other states as well for computer-based assessments, as well as I know our fast testing has online testing tools. So online testing formats have, all of these there where you can look at them as samples. Here's some examples of those for you, such as line guides, magnifiers, sticky notes, highlighters, pointers, and cross-offs. These all kind of pertain, especially the sticky note, highlighter, and cross-offs, to marginalia. Marginalia is a strategy that teachers teach students to be able to mark up their paper pencil test. And that's one of the arguments that we see in the weaknesses, and that I saw in research, that I've heard from some of you in my field study I conducted, and that I've heard even in just regular conversations between my colleagues and myself, is that they're not able to mark up that assessment like they do paper. Well, here again, assessment designers have listened to the reports of and concerns of educators, and they have begun to put these abilities for testing tools and for marginalia into online assessment, computer-based assessment. So do they know how to do it right off the bat? No. But did they know how to use a sticky note on a piece of paper at first? No. We had to teach them that. Did they know to start what to highlight? Nope. We have to teach them, how to highlight as well. Like with paper-based assessment, I know I've had to teach a lot of my students what exactly to highlight, because sometimes when you hand them a highlighter and say you can highlight the key things, they want to highlight the entire paper or highlight every single word as they're working. However, if we teach them exactly what to highlight and how to highlight, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more in a moment, then they will know what to do, and they can do that on paper, on computer based, just like they do paper based now. Same with crossing off or striking through, marking off answers that they've decided are not adequate answers, to as they weed down things such as multiple choice. And the same thing with sticky notes. Sticky notes on testing tools is a way that test designers have provided for students to be able to do that marginalia, to be able to put a sticky note, a digital sticky note, mind you, next to things that they're reading as they're going through an assessment. So these things are there, and we can train them to do that. Reading Wonders is a perfect example of this. And you, as their teacher, can pull up any of these sample tests. You can make sample tests, or you can pull up ones that are already provided for you through most testing formats. And we're going to look at a couple of those and put it under your document camera on an iPad. Pretend you're one of the children. You're going to think out loud through this. We're going to talk about that a little bit more in a moment. I know one thing on the Florida FAST testing. That's our state mandated progress monitoring assessment that our students do 3 times a year now. The testing tools even give some directions if you're on a tablet or a computer laptop, such like that. So I've put a sample here that they provide under tablets, because my local campus, and I believe all over the county that I'm in, Polk County, they all are 1-to-1 iPads now, provided by our district. And I would put that iPad under the document camera, pretending to be one of the children. And I even make myself pretend I'm their age so that they can really see. And I think out loud. I say anything out loud that should be going through my mind as a child when I'm working through a test. I would read through these directions to them. And even like this one button right here, context menu button, I might tell them, look for the button that has the spaghetti stripes, or the racing stripes, or whatever you want to call them, fun little things that will help them to understand that more, keep it in their mind. So when they sit down with these assessments by themselves, when you can't speak to them and you can't help them with something, then they will be prepared, because they've learned this already from you, and you gradually release them into being able to do this on their own throughout the school year before they get to those major state progress monitoring assessments that we have out now. So some of the testing tools, as we saw in our little chart, that they would be able to access in the context menu tools would be highlighters and marking things that you want to review later, like to flag them, the notepads, and selecting your response version, strike throughs, and even tutorials. If children don't know that all these options are there, then that's when they're going to be playing with those, and that's when they're going to lose valuable testing time and get distracted and lose focus. So that's why we're teaching them these things from the beginning of the year. And it starts off with you doing a sample in front of them and them sitting with their iPads and following through with you as you do it. And then again, then the next time you might do part of it and they do part of it with a partner. And then the next time, and these are all samples, mind you, we're not doing this on those state mandated ones, but samples that we have access to. And putting those up there, such as the strike through, teaching them this means you can strike through wrong answers. Highlighters, dropping the highlighter button down on that context menu and showing them exactly how they would pick it, and talk to them about, go ahead and have in your mind what colors you would like, so you're not playing with the colors, and why are reasons we would change colors if we're in the middle of highlighting something. So have these conversations, conferencing with your students, and even in whole group. So it could be individual, it could be in small group, it could be in whole group. All of these things will help them be prepared for that. And in their notepad, telling them this is not a place for you to play, getting them to practice this when they're doing regular assessments in the classroom from the beginning of the year. The more and more that they are familiar with these items, the more that they've already got it out of their system during practice and during regular everyday assignments and classwork and assessments that they have throughout the year, it's not going to be an issue when they get to the real thing for progress monitoring. They're going to see it as, okay, time for me to get busy. I know how to use these things. I know not to play with this. I'm doing my test. So modeling that strike through, and put up the sample under the document camera. This is a sample from the FAST testing that's provided on the FLDOE website. And I'll show you how to get into that if you're not familiar in a little bit. So like showing them that as you're reading through and you're doing your testing strategies, if you've already decided that one of those answers is definitely not it, then you can strike through that answer, and that will help them to weed down their answers. Super beneficial for them to learn to do that, as well as highlighting, showing them exactly what it means to click on that content menu button and showing them what will they see, what does that look like, how often do I have to do that, getting them to actually practice doing that. These are the things that they need to see modeled for them. The line reader and text to speech are great assistives as well in testing tools, and are provided in a lot of our options as well on FAST testing and in our Wonders assessments, such as this line reader is great when children struggle to focus. But we need to teach them how to use the line reader before they get to the test, before they get to progress monitoring. The progress monitoring dates should not be the first time that they see a line reader. It should not be the first time that, oh, by the way, you can use text to speech. No, by then it's too late. By then, yeah, they're going to probably want to play with that. By then, they're not going to really understand, and it's going to be a toy. But if we start with them in the beginning, making sure that students know this is available to them for those that have plans in place, like IEPs and 504s, that they can use these things, or for students that, some of these things are available to all students and some are only available to those with plans. They need to know who they are from the beginning of the year, and you need to make sure that they are implementing this throughout the entire year. That way, when they get to the actual big test for progress monitoring or portfolio testing with Wonders, like we do in our county, in Polk County, then again, they won't play with this because they already know, and they know the expectations. They've had practice with it. They'll get down to business and move on, just like they do with paper pencil. Testing procedures are super important too. At our school, we have a skill of the month every month, and they practice that skill of the month as one of their pieces of their power hours. So testing procedures are part of that, because just like with paper pencil, our students need to know what procedures they should be following as they're taking a test. So we're having these conversations. And yes, at first this is hard because they don't come in already knowing how to do that. Like I said earlier with kindergartners and first graders, it's very difficult. And I've watched this happen. It's super painful for teachers to walk kindergartners through tests for the first time, even in paper pencil. They have to do a lot of spoon feeding and modeling and teaching them how and what, and reading directions and guiding them through this. because they've never done it before. And that's the same things that are holding children back in the efficiency and efficacy of computer-based assessment if they've not had enough practice with it. It's our job as their teachers, the educators, to be sure that they've had enough practice so that when they do have to do these state mandated assessments on computers, they're ready for it. So we need to model, we need to do the think alouds of the testing procedures for students, and then establish those expectations, have them posted up in your room. In our school, we do what's called Rock This Test and Testing Timmy. Testing Timmy's for our primary students. Rock This Test charts are for our upper elementary students. And each of them are specific to what a child needs to be making sure that they understand when they're testing. So like for our primary students, they're making sure their mind is focused. Their eyes are only on their test, no one else's. Their ears are listening for directions from the teacher. Their bodies are sitting at attention. I often teach my students test taking positions, and I'll say that to them at the beginning of every test they do, be it paper, pencil, or computer-based assessment. I'll say tummy's touching the front of your table or desk, back's touching the back of your chair, feet are aiming down at the ground, hands are on top of your desk. I even oftentimes turn the desk around so they're not tempted to play inside that desk when they're in the middle of tests. These are testing procedures and strategies that they can implement. I also talk about hands are only typing and only on my test page. They're not going to other pages. Now, one good thing I do want to point out that we did experience through the fast testing this year is it does lock out the ability for students to go to other websites, cutting down that distractibility. So during fast testing, they don't have that affordance. So that is another negative that we can weed out, that we can say that's not going to affect my students' effectiveness as they take these computer-based tests. Also talking about having that good attitude. Buy-in is everything. If we as teachers go in and, oh, I know you're going to have to do this test and I hate this too. I don't think this is fair. I don't like computer-based assessment. And we present with that type of attitude, but we're going to do this anyway. Everybody listen, let's do this. If we go in with that attitude, that's the attitude our students are going to take. So it's our job as teachers. We saw in that research that I read to you in the beginning. And those were just a couple pieces from multiple pieces of research that I read where researchers have done studies and found the same findings, that it is as effective. There's no difference. The only factor that's playing in there is children aren't familiar, they're not prepared. So that's where all of this comes in. With our upper elementary students, we're making sure they understand they need to read all the questions. And we're making sure that they understand they need to read the passage twice. And when they're reading the questions, we're talking to them. This does not mean that you have to read all the answer choices right away. It means you're just getting those questions in your mind. These are strategies that they can learn for paper-based as well as computer-based. And if we have these charts up on the wall throughout the entire year, we reference them every time they're going to take an assessment. Then by the time they get to their progress monitoring assessment, it's old hat. We've had to take these charts down. I know here in Florida we have to do that by the time they do that, but they don't need it anymore because they've learned it. They know what's expected. They know what to do. Making sure they know to read through that test 2 times. The first time just to get it in their mind. The second time they're reading through it again to be at that time then to do their marginalia. That's when they're going to go in and reread those questions carefully. They're going to read all the choices now. And I even teach them to try and think of what that choice is before you even read the answer choices. What would you say is the answer based on what you read, when the notes you made? Because if they've read the questions first, when they go back in to read the assessment passages, if it's a literacy-based one, then they're going to already have that question in their mind and it'll send off a red bell for them as soon as they see that piece. We're also making sure that they know that it's good practice to underline answers in their passages and do that crossing off or strike through of wrong answers. And if it's something such as conventions or context clue words, telling what they mean, such like that, we can practice plugging them in. That means saying the sentence with the different words in there and checking our work. This is huge in computer-based assessment. I know you as well as I have probably had, I know I have, students that will get up to the midpoint and be like, I'm done, and close their iPad or their laptop, or turn their paper over when it was paper based and say they're finished, and you've taught them to go back and look through again. That's super important for them to go back and reread everything, and we're teaching them that these things along with testing strategies. So let's see, where can we see some of those sample tests? Well, if you're in Polk County, you would have them open up ClassLink. If you want to look at a sample test for the fast testing, you would click on this FLDOE icon. If you want to show them samples through for Wonders, if you're in Florida, you would click on this Connect Ed, and you can have pre-set up samples even in Wonders to be able to walk them through this. So let's take FLDOE, for example. If you click on that icon, let me back up and show you that one more time. It looks like this. And then you should be opened up to these two choices where you can view sample items for VPK through second grade. So if you're a primary teacher, you'd be opening this section. If you're an upper elementary, you'd be opening this one where it's sample tests for third and up. And then when you get into those spaces, then it will give them samples just like they're going to see on their fast test, model accessibility settings, and it instantly gives them the spots where, all right, this is what we've talked about all year, or what we've talked about prior this year, because since progress monitoring is 3 times a year now, you're going to want to make sure you've done this like since week 1 as you're preparing them to get ready for that first progress monitoring that they'll have in the beginning of the school year. So you're going to talk about print sizes. Who needs to enlarge their print and why? What are reasons we do that? We're not playing with that. We're not making them this big all of a sudden on the screen. I've seen children do that. It's not a playtime. You make it to the size that you need it to be. And unless you have a reason or a disability that you need it to be really, really large, then you shouldn't be playing with that. So pick your size at the beginning of the test and go ahead and get started. Another piece of that would be the background color choices. Talking about and letting them practice that in previous assessments. Do you really need to make your screen black with white print? If you do, and that helps you feel like you can read it better, that's fine. But we're not changing it 5 times as we're taking our test. And if they go ahead and get that out of their systems early in the year, then they're not trying to do that during progress monitoring because they've already figured that out. And making that an expectation, telling them, I expect that once you've made your settings, that's where they stay throughout your test. This is what I want to see. And implementing those expectations when they're in practice, when you're doing that modeling, that gradual releasing, when they're doing regular assignments for you, implementing those expectations all the time, not allowing room for this to be considered a playtime. This is serious and they have to take it that way. So here are some of those choices that they would see with the colors, and you can talk to them about that and what reasons that they might prefer to use one of those different colors of magenta or white on black and different things like that. So conversations, I think that might be a theme that we're having throughout this professional development today. You want to make sure that they're having good conversations with you and you're conferencing with them during their error analysis about these things as well. Also talking to them about those accommodations like we mentioned earlier in today's session. Children need practice weekly, on a weekly basis with their accommodations. This should not be something they don't see until progress monitoring test day. They need to already know what they are. They need to already know how to implement those, and they need to already have had practice doing that. It shouldn't be the first time we hand them a Spanish-English dictionary. That's the first time they've ever seen that, and they don't even know how to open it or use it. That's something we as their teachers and our paras that come in can help us with as well. Our resource people that come in, you don't have to have it all just on you, but these are things that you can assign to these support people that we have in place to help you with that as well. And just being familiar with those, making sure that they're utilizing those, the text-to-speech, masking, adjusting their print and such like that. If they get the read aloud, and if they get extended time, all these things are important, which now in our fast testing, they get all the time they need. but that's going to be another conversation here in a moment. Um, and also how to turn those things on and if they should turn those things on. They should already know if that's something that they do. Now let's talk about pacing. I mentioned it just a second ago. Let's visit that for a moment. Pacing is so important for students when they're testing. They can get burnout if they stay with it too long. And I have seen students think, oh, if I stay with this to the very last minute, that means I'm going to get it all right. And they're really just kind of sitting there staring, letting their screen go idle. They're not really doing anything, or they're staring off into space and they're not concentrating or thinking. That's not good pacing either. Just like Christmas treeing that I talked about before is not good pacing. We need to start from the beginning of the year teaching children what adequate pacing is for themselves. And yes, some students take longer than others, and that's okay. Again, we would address that in those individual conference moments with students, as well as in whole group. We can find ways to be discreet about these things, to not embarrass our students, but also to afford them the abilities that they're provided during these computer-based assessments. One way to help them to practice this is by putting a online stopwatch up on the screen. I've put a sample one here. You might want to jot this website down if you haven't already made yourself familiar with it in the past. It's online-stopwatch.com. It goes up on your smart board. You can set a timer and you can say to students, if you get to this point and you're already finished, I don't feel like you've spent enough time. I want you to go back and reread that and spend some more time thinking about each of those questions and answers, rereading your passages, making sure that you really mark your answers to the best of your ability. Or if they get to this certain point and they've only answered like 2 questions because they've been sitting and daydreaming or not focused, that's a conversation as well. Both very important. Both are things that we have to talk about with paper-based assessment as well. I've had students do this. I had a student one time got stuck on a question, sat there for a long time because she froze on a question and didn't know that she needed to just keep moving on. She forgot we had talked about that and didn't end up finishing her assessment and did not do very well on that. That is one good thing now about FAST on computer-based assessment. They will get unlimited time and it will tell her if she's not finished. So we don't have that as much of an issue, but it is an issue because we don't want them to sit and stare. We have to teach them, if you're stuck on one, you've spent an adequate amount of time, and talking to them about what that amount of time might be. And we can talk about different types of questions they might encounter, which ones might take them a couple minutes, which ones they might need to spend longer in rereading for. And if they feel like they've spent adequate time, they still don't know their answer, go with their first thought, make a best guess choice, and move on, flag it, and move on to the next question. And they can come back to that question again when they get to the end. And sometimes their brains will reset after they leave the question. They may even come up with the answer as they've moved on. And then they can go back and fix that answer if they felt like they had it incorrect. So pacing is definitely something we want to have a conversation with our students about. The big thing here, friends, that I want to really make clear is modeling for your students, those sample questions, doing that think aloud, showing them exactly how they need to walk through these assessments. This is imperative, no matter what age they are, for them to learn to do this, and definitely helps them. And you can make this happen. But again, you need to have already practiced this on your own and done it by yourself at home, or sitting by your pool, or after school, or during your planning time, and make sure, or with a group of other colleagues, all of you sit together and walk through a sample test so you can talk about it together, things that might arise. Do that collaboration. And on that note, collaborations and conferencing with students are so important as well. You want to make sure that the students are following those teaching and testing strategies and practice. Pull kids together in groups, have them have conversations prior to progress monitoring testing about other online tests that maybe not online, but those biweekly assessments that they've done. What are some technical errors they've run into? Put a chart up on the wall. What are some things we can do to make sure we don't see these errors when we're taking our big tests for progress monitoring? You can talk to them whole group. You can do it small group. You can do it individually. Nevertheless, it needs to happen. And even allowing them to talk together, putting up charts and discussing it, helps them know that maybe they're not the only ones, and learning from each other's mistakes. So these are very beneficial as well for helping them make sure that they know how to conquer any of those kinds of errors in this format. In collaborative meetings amongst each other, and this is where I was going with this just a moment ago. You're not alone in your quest to prepare your students for computer-based testing. We have lots of support set up for you. We have to share ideas, to model for you, co-teaching, and supporting you with time and resources. Myself as your literacy coach, our math coach, our science coach, administration, our leadership team, resource people that we have on campus. All of us are available and willing, our tech coaches, to come in and really help you be able to help our children to be prepared for this. Since there should be no difference, it is just as effective. So I do hope that we are going to begin having collaborative quarterly meetings this year to discuss things that we see that are working with computer-based assessment and things that are not working. As teams, I want to see us do this on grade levels, so we can come up with new ideas along the way. And along with those that have been mentioned today, there's a lot more ideas. These are just a handful, to be sure that our students are ready. And on that note, if you'd all grab your device, I would like for you to take a look at this resources Padlet that I have available for you. We'll pause the presentation here for a moment and we'll look at this on the side. I've already begun to put together some articles that have some great ideas and some research that has been done for you to review yourself, as well as things like our Testing Timmy chart, our Rock This Test, and different things like that. Some other little things that other teachers have prepared through blogs and such that are available to you for free. I also want you to know that I'd like for you to add to this Padlet as well. And it's going to be an online forum for any of you to access anytime you'd like, to look at this more in depth. Okay, so go ahead and take a moment and scan that. And let's look at that now, and we'll pause the presentation and look at some of those more in depth. Okay, so now that we've finished looking at all those great resources, let's do a quick ticket out the door. I want to know your thoughts now. Are you feeling a little bit more confident? What are your concerns? Things like that. If you'll just fill this quick ticket out the door for me, and that way I know some areas that we need to grow together as a team still, where I can support you further as we move on throughout this year. Because remember, you're not in this alone. I am here for you, and so is a lot of other people. So you can do this, and computer-based assessment is as effective, and I can't wait to see how many of you begin to turn that frown upside down and embrace computer-based assessment like we have paper-based assessment, and making sure that our students are prepared. And I can't wait to talk to you more about it. All right. Thank you for joining me today. Please feel free to reach out.